Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everybody for joining me today as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those new to the show, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. If you're wondering why we pair Pillars of Eternity and Avowed together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. So if you're excited for Avowed and you haven't yet gotten to Pillars of Eternity, I highly recommend it, but I mean, obviously I'm biased towards that, but it's definitely a great way to learn about the world that Avowed is going to be played in. As well, though, if you're just into Pillars of Eternity and you just love the lore and the world and you want to get back into it, or you just like talking about this stuff, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. In today's episode, I'm finally taking a break from looking at the creatures and beasts that we see within Pillars of Eternity and speculating on stuff that we might see in Avowed. And I'm going to turn towards some companion adventures that we see from Pillars of Eternity 1. Specifically, the adventures that you can send some companions on when you are the owner and proprietor of a stronghold known as Caed Nua. So to back up a little bit for those who don't know, when you play Pillars of Eternity 1, you, the player character, you end up becoming in charge of a stronghold. So, like a castle with walls and some buildings in there, like an entire place for people to live and thrive within an area. Kind of like a lord's reach, if you would. And being in charge of this property, for lack of a better word, gives certain responsibilities and certain rewards. One such thing is that at times you will have adventures that kind of come to your attention, things that need done by other people or problems that you can send someone out to solve. So this isn't something that you do as a player character in the game. You send one of the companions that you meet within the game's narrative to go out and complete these quests off screen in the background. And so while you're out doing your thing, these companions are out somewhere in the world of Eora doing their thing, and they return back to Caed Nua, the place that you own, with treasure and rewards, which you, the player character, gain the benefit from. And it's just part of that immersion and part of that roleplay. But when you start to dive into the actual adventure that these companions take and what happens, you learn some interesting things about the world itself. So today we're going to be taking a look at the legendary adventures of the Caed Nua stronghold system.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So there are 5 adventures we're going to be talking about today, and they are in the legendary category. So when I said the legendary adventures in the Caed Nua stronghold, I was being literal about that. We have these adventures called A Solitary Mark, At the Edge of All Known Things, Liminal Spaces, The Coal Eater, and The Glass Tree. Now, some of these I've talked about before in other episodes. For example, The Glass Tree talks a little bit about the Living Lands, which is where Avowed is taking place, and I did an episode about the Living Lands recently, and I did talk a little bit about this quest there. But we'll be reading it in deeper detail right away. But first we're going to talk about A Solitary Mark. So now with each of these adventures, I'm going to read the pitch for the adventure and kind of like recap it and then go through the conclusion about what happens. And we'll talk about any relatable lore as we go through it. But A Solitary Mark is a legendary off-screen companion adventure. So just again to reiterate, this is an adventure that one of your companions does off-screen while you're playing the game. Here's the pitch for A Solitary Mark adventure. From the eastern reach to Adir to Old Valia, people of all ages are manifesting a strange and distinctive mark somewhere on the inside of their left thigh. There appears to be no common link between the individuals, nor has any of them reported any ill effects from the mark, but few think that it has a herald of good things to come. Some well-traveled Valians have claimed that a not-so-secret society has taken an interest in the marked people and may have something nefarious in mind for them. And so there we have the pitch for that adventure. And I really like these pitches as a side note for, D&D games or anything like that. If you're into tabletop role-playing games and you're a dungeon master or game master and you need inspiration or prompts for an adventure, I feel like this is a good hook, something like this. Obviously, this is a little bit more on a worldwide scale, so it depends on the level you're playing at, but regardless. Anyways, let's dive into what this first pitch is talking about in terms of lore. The first part says, from the eastern reach to Adir to Old Valia, which is just, saying all across the world kind of a thing. The eastern reach is a continent that the first Pillars game is played on, or at least a section of that continent. Adir is another continent across the ocean, and they are actually the mother nation to the Deerwood, which is the setting for the first Pillars of Eternity game, which is on the continent of Eastern Reach. Old Valia is another place completely separate from either of these, and that is another old civilization, just like Adir, whereas Deerwood on the Eastern Reach is a newer civilization. So it seems that this phenomenon about these marks becoming made is happening in the New World as well as in these older worlds. It doesn't say anything about Rawatai, so I don't know if it's just related to certain... I don't know why it would be related to certain groups, but we don't really know. It's just that there is a strange mark on the inside of the left thigh to these people, and there's no common link between them. This is just nothing that we know. And it doesn't even talk about what the mark is or what it looks like. But the only thing that we kind of get a hint to is that there is a not-so-secret society that's taken an interest in these people that have these markings. So yeah, this could be a good adventure hook that's going on in the background of a tabletop game like Dungeons & Dragons. But now here's the conclusion for this adventure, once enough in-game days have passed for the companion to do this. It was difficult for Companion to track down the cult that had taken a special interest in the marked people over such a large area. Eventually, Companion managed to rout a small cell of cultists and discovered a wealth of incriminating documents. The group called themselves the White Flame and believed that the marked individuals were meant to be vessels for a reincarnation of Aethys. More on that in a second. The cult had started kidnapping marked people and taking them to holding areas for observation and experimentation. A map that Companion discovered laid out the several of these cells as well as new locations that they intended to target. With the assistance of the shield bearers of St. Elcha, Companion was able to raid one of their strongholds in the Seathwood. It is unclear if the power of the White Flame is truly broken, but the abduction stopped shortly after the intervention. A little bit more lore going on here. So basically, we discover this cultist group known as the White Flame, and they believe that these marked people are meant to be vessels for a reincarnation of Aethys. Now, if you're not familiar with the game, then I'll give a little bit of history here. Aethys is one of the 11 gods of this world. So at the time of playing Pillars of Eternity, we're introduced to a number of gods, slowly but surely, and one of the main ones being the god Aethys. Except the interesting thing about Aethys is that he was apparently killed by something called the Godhammer Bomb when he inhabited a farmer named Widewin, and while possessing this person, led an army from the nation of Raed Saris down towards the Deerwood in some sort of a religious war. And in retaliation, these priests of another god, Magrin, created the Godhammer Bomb, which destroyed Widewin and apparently killed Aethys inside of him as well. The people who are part of this cult, the White Flame, believe that Aethys, the god, will reincarnate in some way. And it's not a crazy thing to think, Aethys is a god, so you blow him up. There must be some way he'll come back, right? There's a lot of contention, a lot of debate within this fantasy world as to whether or not Aethys is truly dead. But obviously the White Flame cult believes that he will reincarnate, and that the people who are marked like this are the people that he is going to reincarnate into, whether either all at once or just one of these individuals. They obviously don't know, which is why they're abducting these people for observation and experimentation. That last part's a little unnerving, but, makes for good fantasy. So that's kind of the background there as to who the White Flame is and what they believe who Aethys is and why you would think about him being reincarnated. Thankfully, the companion, along with the assistance of the shield bearers of St. Elja, they were able to break into one of their strongholds. Now, the shield bearers of St. Elja is a order of paladins. So if you've consumed any fantasy media at all, you might be familiar with the idea of paladins. These zealot warriors, usually depicted in like plate armor and with holy symbols and smiting the evil ones and things like that. Those kind of class-based characters, paladins, and this is one of the orders of that. The shield bearers have their own history, which is based in the nation of Adir, which is actually where your Avowed main character is going to come from. There was a queen of the elves before the humans and the elves got together to form the nation of Adir in the Adiran continent. This is back in their early history. There was the shield bearers of St. Elcha, which I believe were either, I can't remember if they were there to protect the elven queen or if they were there to protect an emissary of the queen, but essentially this is the history of those shield bearers, that they started out as protectors of important royalty within the Adiran history. And it's also fitting that the companion, the shield bearers, were able to raid a stronghold of the White Flame cultists in a place known as the Seathwood. The Seathwood is actually implied a wooded area. It's a big forest that is in the Adiran continent, and the Seathwood is actually where the elven half of the Adiran people come from. and that would where the Elven Queen would have been from, or at least their history would have been there, right? So it kind of fitting that the companion that you sent this quest on and the shield bearers got together and they went to the Seathwood. And it seems like they were able to kind of interrupt what the White Flame was doing, but we don't learn anything else about the markings, right? Which I think is good if you're wanting to use this for a tabletop role-playing game. For me, this has a lot of signs that Wal is involved, Wal being the god of mysteries, secrets, revelations, and dreams, things like that. The god Wal is one of the most interesting deities in all of Eora. Just one of my favorite topics to be talked about. And the fact that there are these mysterious markings showing up and nobody knows what they're about and no one can figure out anything that's going on, and it seems to be really random that people got them, it just kind of screams Wal to me, right? The only downside to that would be that there is potentially no reason for it. If the god Wal is involved, he might have just, or it, or they, or she, or some other pronoun that is appropriate for this deity, might have just inflicted this mark on people for the sake of the chaos to do it. Or they might have been people in history that were really important domino pieces for something later on in history. Like, we've no idea when it comes to Wal what's going on. It could be related to Aethys. It could be related to one of the other deities. We don't really know. But it's interesting also, just from a lore perspective, to think that this kind of thing can occur, that these people from disparate parts of the world can have this mark just sort of appear on themselves, which is another reason why I kind of think that it might be Wal, because there are a type of person in the world of Eora called godlike, and they're essentially people that when they're in the womb of their mother, they are blessed by one of the gods, and they are born with a physiology that represents that god. So if you are blessed by the goddess Magrin, goddess of fire and war, you come out the womb, with fire for hair, or obsidian rock for skin. You might have sparks flying behind you wherever you go. You might have devil horns, right? Like, you take on that kind of visage of the deity that blessed you into that godlike. And with Wal, I have this running theory that Wal godlikes look exactly like normal people. The interesting thing about godlikes is that they clearly have an innate connection to the god that blessed them, that made them that way. So there is a reality to which that there could just be a bunch of people out there who look like normal people, but they're actually Wal godlikes. And then Wal was just like, I'm going to put a mark on the inside of their left thigh, and that'll really throw things into a frenzy. I don't know. That's my prevailing theory. Obviously, this might not even have a conclusion. Like, there might not be an idea over at Obsidian what the markings had to do. It might just be there for you to kind of take and run with for your own games. Who knows why they did that, but that's the idea I kind of come up with. I'm interested to hear what any of you guys listening might think. worldofaora@gmail.com if you have any theories on what the markings are. The next legendary adventure is called At the Edge of All Known Things. This one has to do with a scholar known as Amaya, who is kind of researching a lot of the monarchs throughout the world and trying to get, some esoteric history and knowledge from them. And our companion that we send out helps him with that. But let's get into the pitch for this adventure. The famous and wealthy Rawatai scholar Amaya has been compiling a massive codex of Eora's varied legends over her long life. Pulling from Amawa sources as well as from a dear-old Valia and the Shadowmill Plains and Nasitak, the work is truly gargantuan, spanning thousands of pages. While she has had scribes busy for the last 2 decades copying her current body of work, a few folk tales have remained out of her reach, and she has attempted to contact the Elder Glumfallen of the White That Wends, arranging a special meeting with the Aedir Inesithrua, I don't know if I ever pronounced that right, and sit among the most revered Riao of Glanfath. In all attempts, she has been unsuccessful due to various threats that stand in her way. These last subjects will be the final chapters of her life's work, and she's seeking experienced adventurers to assist her. All right, so this is the issue that is laid before you as the Lord of Caed Nua, and so you send out a companion to help with this adventure. Now, before we get into the conclusion, I'll just kind of go over some of the lore that we see here. First of all, a famous and wealthy Rawatai scholar named Amaya. Rawatai being the empire that Kai comes from. If you've seen the trailer last June for Avowed, and they had that green-skinned humanoid-looking person doing the narrating over the screen, that is an Amawan person, and he actually comes from the nation of Rawatai, which I recently did a lot of lore on in one of my episodes. If you're interested, go check out more about them. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye out in Avowed for anything written by Amaya, because I want to know the kind of things that she's writing in regards to this. But anyway, she's been compiling a massive codex of Eora's varied legends over her long life. But she has 3 particular people that she is trying to contact to get a little bit of clarification on, either give some history or some stories from. And so she's basically trying to get in touch with the leaders of Glomfellan tribes from the White That Wends. Glomfellan is the name given to Pale Elves. The White That Wends is the location they live in, which is essentially a sort of habitable South Pole, if you will. She's also trying to arrange a meeting with the Esoteric. I don't know how to pronounce that off the top of my head, but that's the name of a scepter in the nation of Aedir. Now, why she would want to schedule a meeting with a weapon or a scepter might sound curious to you, but there is a reason for it, and we'll get more into that in the conclusion. And lastly, she wants to sit down with the most revered Riao of Erglanfoth. Erglanfoth is one of the locations that you can actually play in the first Pillars of Eternity game, and their elders, their kind of governmental committee, if you will, is called the Riao. And so she just basically wants to sit down with their leaders and talk to them. But all 3 of these are really difficult to get an audience with. The White That Wends is a very dangerous place to go, and they're not always very welcoming to outsiders, especially the deeper into the White That Wends you go. The Erglanfoths, the people, they really like to safeguard their society and their secrets, so it's not an easy thing to kind of break into. And the Scepter of Aedir is houses basically the souls of all their previous emperors. As you can imagine, it is very, very well guarded and not easily allowed to just go and approach. But anyways, that's the pitch of what's going on, so let's see what happens as a result. It took Companion more than 3 attempts to contact the Glomfellan of the White That Wends without being attacked. When Amaya was finally able to speak with the elders, she wrote down their stories from where the Glomfellan had come from and how they had arrived at the bottom of the world so long ago. Getting access to the sacred Adra sepulchre of the Aedir emperors, the Esoteric, involved more than a little trickery. Even though Amaya was only able to speak with the spirits of the dead emperors for a few minutes, it was enough to complete that portion of her research. The wise ones of Erglanfoth, the Riao, entertained Amaya's requests, but they questioned her for days to ensure that she would not share their sacred secrets, nor portray their peoples in a bad light. The Riao passed on their stories of the early days of Erglanfoth, how they had arrived there, and how they had received their instructions to guard the Ingwithan ruins for all time. Satisfied that her research was complete, Amaya returned to Rawatai to pen her final chapters and have them copied by her scribes. Though it would be several years until any complete copies emerged, she gifted the Companion with a condensed codex of her essential work, including a large number of spells that had been enchanted in the last few pages. Alright, so this is the meat and potatoes of some of the lore here. So if you're well versed in the lore of Pillars of Eternity, then some of this will not sound that unfamiliar to you, but if you're relatively new, then some of this might be like, I don't really understand what's going on here or going on there, or you might not even recognize the importance of it. So the first thing is Amaya talking to the Glomfellan in the White That Wends, which again, those are the pale elves that live in the South Pole of this fantasy world. Being able to speak with them, is a big deal because they're not really keen on outsiders, a little bit xenophobic. You learn that a little bit more in the second Pillars of Eternity game, but they're definitely xenophobic, depending on which tribe you're talking to. But regardless, she wrote down stories about where the Glomfellan had come from and how they arrived at the bottom of the world so long ago. This is in reference to the fact that, and we don't really know why or how or the whole story of the matter, but at some point in time, the Pale Elves did a mass migration from somewhere else in the world to the White That Wends. They weren't born there. They hadn't lived there forever. The Pale Elves lived in another place within the world at some point in time, and then I don't remember how long ago, but it was a big number. Like, they all just migrated to the White That Wends, and that's just where they set up shop. And as to why, who knows? We really honestly don't know the reason as to why. My guess is that it has something to do with the god Remergond, the god of entropy and cold and bad luck, because over in the Glomfellan tribes in the White That Wends, Remergond is kind of their patron god. You can worship more than one god at a time in this world. That's not like an unheard thing of, but there usually tends to be one main one that your people group revolve around. Now, the next part has to deal with going to the Esoteric, which is the sepulchre, not a scepter, sorry, is a sepulchre of the Aedir Empire, and it contains the souls of their previous emperors, which, again, is not an easy thing to do, and in fact, it sounds like the companion you sent on the quest had to use a little bit of trickery to get them a few minutes to talk with the spirits of these dead emperors, but that's all they needed to get the research done. So it'd be interesting to hear what they learned about there. The reason that something like this can happen is very likely because the sepulcher has a piece of Adra in it, which is a gemstone resource in this world that's unique to this fantasy world, and that gemstone, Adra, can house souls within it. It has the capability to store essence, which is the stuff souls are made of. And lastly, Amaya speaks to the wise ones of Erglanfoth. We don't really learn anything crazy there. Obviously, they don't want their secrets to get out, and they don't want to be portrayed badly. And I think that that's fair. The fact that they grilled her for days on end, I think just really gets across the point of how guarded these people are about their culture and their history and where they're from. The one piece of lore that I will point out is that how they had arrived where they are and their instructions to guarding within ruins. Kind of like the Glomfelans, but obviously a little bit different. The Glonfothan people ended up where they are because basically they were told to come there, and then they were charged to guard these sites that were owned by the Ingwithan people. The Ingwithan people are a civilization of people that have long since died off in the history of this world. The only thing that's left over of them are these ancient ruins dotted around the world, particularly in the Deerwood area. And the Glonfothan people guard this like a sacred duty of theirs. Like they're willing to die to protect them, kind of a thing. That's how important it is. And so it sounds like Amaya has received some stories about those origins. Yeah, it'd be cool to read some of the lore from this person's writing, but it sounds like in this fantasy world anyways, it'll be several years before this is complete. But by the time Avowed takes place, it might be several years from when this adventure happened. So hey, I mean, keep your eye out for any books that are written by a Rautain scholar named Amaya, and perhaps you'll be able to read some of this stuff. I know that's what I'll be doing. Next is a adventure called Liminal Spaces, and I have talked about this one before on a previous episode, albeit very briefly, just because I didn't want to talk about it too much, but there's an episode I did a long time ago on teleportation, on whether it's possible or, feasible within the world of Eora, because magic exists, and so can you teleport? The short answer being no, but there's an asterisk on that no, to basically say, not yet, and also that if you can teleport, it won't just be like, I draw a circle on the ground and I poof wherever I want. It's very unlikely it's going to be anything like that. But this adventure kind of dives into the magic and the idea of teleportation within this world a little bit more. Avalian animancer Acheta, known for her extensive work in the properties of living Adra, caused a huge stir in Biajepe when she claimed to her colleagues that she believed all living Adra is interconnected within the heart of Eora itself. The claim alone was not that scandalous, but Acheta boasted that she had created a device that allowed her to physically travel along the pathways of living Adra down towards their source. The things she claimed to see caused an uproar among some more religious animancers, many of whom found the statements blasphemous. A few days later, Acheta was nowhere to be found and her home had been thoroughly sacked. Some fear that she was killed for her boasts, others fear that her statements were pure fact, and Acheta escaped the wrath of her colleagues by using her invention to permanently step to the between. I guess I probably should say in between. Okay, so that's the pitch for this adventure. Here's basically what's going on. There's an animancer, which is a person that studies the soul, or more specifically the stuff of the soul, essence, and obviously also studies Adra, since Adra can contain essence within it. And so that's what an animancer is. And this animancer, Acheta, apparently she's been doing a lot of work with living Adra, which is just to say that's Adra that's doing the thing that it's supposed to do. If there's Adra that's not living, that means it doesn't really conduct essence. It doesn't conduct soul energy very good, or it's not housing anyway. That or it's a reference to Adra that is connected to a vein within the world of Eora. But anyways, so she had this claim that she believed all living Adra is interconnected within the heart of Eora itself, which is to say basically that all the Adra that you see in the world, obviously unless it's been mined and extracted, but all the natural deposits of Adra you see in the world is actually one giant piece across the entire globe, and that it is actually connected deep under the surface of Eora, connected deep in under the world there, and that so it's basically all just one giant piece of Adra. And this is obviously something that can't be proven, at least yet in this world's history. They don't have the technology to prove something like that, but it's widely accepted to be true. And I mean, as far as a lot of us players are concerned, it may as well be true. It definitely kind of points in that direction. So she's saying that, okay, all Adra is interconnected within the planet itself. That's not very scandalous. Most people are accepting of that. The thing that is scandalous, though, is that she says she's created a device that allowed her to physically travel from one spot of living Audra to a new spot where living Audra is. So she's essentially using this one big piece of Audra throughout the globe. She's using it as a kind of a teleportation system, as a highway from one place to another. And that is a pretty scandalous thing, but it's also pretty exciting, I would say. But apparently what she did is that she went to where, quote unquote, the source is of Audra, which, where's the source? Who knows? Is it the center of the world? I don't know, right? But so she essentially goes on her own journey to the center of Eora, and what she claims to see there, which unfortunately we don't hear anything about in this adventure description, the things she says there causes an uproar amongst people. One can only imagine what she must have seen, right? Like, did she actually go to the center of a planet? Because if she did, you'd expect to see like molten rock or something like that. But I suspect that she saw something a little bit more fantastical. And one of the reasons I say that is because in Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, if you're playing the Beast of Winter DLC, at one point you get to enter into the realm of Remergond, who I've already talked about, the god of cold and entropy. And if you actually pay attention to like the background of that area that you're in, you kind of notice these like green-like structures jutting out of the top of your screen, which kind of like is saying that there's something high above you that's jutting down towards you, and it kind of looks like Audra. And I've always thought that that kind of indicates that the planes that the gods exist in, the locations that the gods kind of exist in a spiritual sense, or is assumed to be spiritual, that's where Audra goes to. Which could lead to one of two conclusions. It could either mean that A, there is literally a physical space at the center of this world where the gods live, it's like an actual physical space, or there's something about Audra that transcends from a physical plane to a non-physical plane, even though it exists in both of those planes at the exact same time. I like that idea a little bit more because it sounds a little bit more fantasy, but either one, it kind of leads to a similar conclusion in the sense that you can travel from the surface of Eora through to the source of this Audra down towards where the gods basically live, into their realms, whether it's physical or in a parallel plane, who's to say, but regardless. So she goes down to this place and she sees some stuff, comes back and reports it, and people are losing their minds over it. And they go to basically kill her or go deal with her, and no one can find her, and her house is ransacked. And so people think that she permanently stepped to the in-between, which is the space between life and death. Okay, so that's the pitch. Let's conclude this adventure and see what we learn from it. Pursuing an animancer through the solid rock of Eora proved to be a difficult task for the companion. After inquiring with various Valian cartographers and explorers, the companion was able to traverse a huge cave network in the mountains north of the Gualfi that traveled along several long veins of Audra. It took the help of 5 accomplished animancers to contact Acheta, who communicated back to them through flashes of images traveling along the Audra. Unfortunately, the pulsing in the Audra alerted a particularly hostile community of Vithrak, who temporarily forced the companion and the animancers to retreat to another part of the cavern network. Though Acheta communicated that she could not return, she suggested that she was someplace new and wonderful. Images of vast, fantastic spaces filled the heads of the animancers and the companion. Then the communication stopped. The animancers attempted to resume contact, but after days of trying, decided it was futile. The Sangreta Ducala of Biajepe determined that Acheta's estate should be divided up among the animancers of the city to assist them in their research. To the companion, they gave a strange and elaborate brass Audra helm. A number of animancers were infuriated by the Sangreta Ducala's decision, but the Duke could not be persuaded to overrule them. Alright, so it was a really interesting conclusion, because it does definitely seem to indicate and confirm this idea that you can teleport using Audra, which you see a little bit in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, that they're trying to experiment with that kind of technology. To what level of success, I'll leave for you to find by playing the game, or listening to my episode on teleportation. But regardless, the idea that you can confirm that you can teleport places while you're physically alive, like, that is an insanely interesting concept, and it really opens up a lot within the world of Eora of just what things are possible and where you can go and the things that you can do. And this idea that Acheta was able to teleport to the source of Audra, where it comes from, which I theorize to be the planes where the gods are dwelling, and that she is in this place that is a fantastical place and it's new and wonderful, so she might be happy there. That's a crazy thing to think about, especially because if this is the place where you're supposed to go after you die, that's where your soul goes after you die, the fact that Acheta is able to go there soul and body is a very phenomenal thing. But of course, we don't really know if Echeta is the one who is responding, or if it's one of the gods pretending to be Echeta. We don't really know that, but it's not really alluded to either way. But yeah, the ideas that are sprung forth from this really open a lot the metaphysical possibilities within this world. So, especially for you to play with if you're playing a tabletop role-playing game. Some things here that we don't know about. The mountains north of an area called Gualfi. No idea where that is. Don't even know what continent it's on. We talk about Valia a lot, so my guess is that it has something to do with the Valian Republics, which is on the same continent that the First Pillars of Game is played on. It's just not on the map of the game. So maybe that. I don't know. That's my best guess. The only other lore here to talk about is the Sangreta Ducala of Biajepe. Biajepe is one of the cities of the Valian Republics, which is it's not a colony set up by the old Valian society. It is a set of cities that are kind of like a confederation, if you will. They're their own nation now, but each city-state is kind of governing themselves. But those cities, 5 of them together, create the Valian Republics area. Biajepe is one of those cities. And the Sangreta Ducala, I believe, is actually a committee, like a group of people. And so this committee of people decided something, or the Sangreta Ducala is like the one person who's in charge of everything. But usually that person's referred to just as the Duke. Sangreta Ducala, I believe, is like the committee of people that the Duke is also part of. I can't remember the lore exactly, so don't quote me on that, but there you go. So part of the Valian governmental system. And so that's liminal spaces. 2 more to go through. I know this is a lot of lore, but it's all really fascinating stuff. At least, for people like me, if you're a huge nerd. And if you don't like this, then you're not a nerd. You have to give your nerd card back. You're not allowed to have it anymore. I will accept those sent to me in the mail. Okay, let's move on to the next adventure called The Coal Eater. Now, this one has something that I do find a little bit interesting, but we unfortunately don't know a lot about. I just wish there was a little bit more in the Pillars games about this place called Abet, because we see it mentioned a lot in different sources of lore, but we don't really experience it in the game. My theory is that Obsidian originally did want to have Abet featured. In fact, I think it was confirmed somewhere. I don't actually remember. But we didn't actually get to see it in the second Pillars game. But regardless, this is the legendary adventure, The Coal Eater. Something has awakened in the Black Hills of Abet, a great and terrible titan that rises up from beneath the ground to devour coal mines and destroy its workers as it passes. Even sailors coming near Abet from the Deadfire Archipelago have seen the behemoth walking along the screaming cliffs. No one is certain where the creature could come from or when it will stop terrorizing the Black Hills, but the ruling families of Abet seem uninterested in intervening directly. Basically, there's this giant behemoth-sized monster, a terrible titan, in the Black Hills of Abet where these coal mines are, and it is just destroying everything. So that's causing quite a problem. The only lore that we see in here comes from all the stuff that is being capitalized. So Abet is a location within the World of Eora, and actually, if you click on Abet in this article on the fandom Wikipedia, you actually can see the flag for this nation, which I don't remember where it is in game, although someone did send me a source for it, so I'll have to check that out soon. In the E3 trailer, the fake E3 trailer from June of last year, if you pause on there's a few frames where it's possible, but if you pause at a certain point when the player character is on that dock city, that port city, if you look in the background, there's all these banners and flags hanging about, and one of those banners was the same flag that we see on this website for Abet. So there's actually a chance that the nation of Abet is being represented in the game of Avowed in this port city. But so we have the Black Hills of Abet, capital B, capital H, Black Hills, and which I'm guessing is probably a location where they mine for coal. It seems that Abet probably is a coal distributor, if you will. But there's this giant titan rises from beneath the ground, devours these coal mining establishments and the workers. Even people sailing near there can see this thing walking along what's called the Screaming Cliffs, and those are capitalized as well, so that's probably another location. Why they're called the Screaming Cliffs, I have no idea. I don't know if it's like a weird weather phenomenon that causes howling winds to sound like screaming, or if a lot of people just jump off of it for some reason. Who knows? But yeah, so this creature is terrorizing the Black Hills in Abet, and they want something to be done about it. And so what you do, you send one of your companions, and this is the conclusion you get as a result. When the companion arrived in the Black Hills of Abet, it was not difficult to locate the great monster. From miles away, anyone with good eyes could note its passage simply by seeing the wake of destruction it left everywhere it walked. Walking upright on two legs, its skin was as black as the coal it was devouring, constantly shedding enormous amounts of dark earth. Though the miners originally had no idea what had awoken the creature, Companion learned that the mine where the creature had emerged had tunneled into the subterranean ruins of some ancient pre-Abet civilization. An Amaoan scholar from Abet assisted the Companion in delving the depths of the ruins and translating inscriptions that portrayed the Titan walking in ages past. By ringing a series of bells around the city's ruins, the Companion called the piece back to where it had emerged from. Unfortunately, its return caused the collapse of most of the remaining ruins, and even so, the scholars of Abet were pleased at the discovery. The miners of the area, though, not happy to go back to work, were at least relieved that the Great Coal Eater was no longer a threat. So there's a lot of opened up questions here, but not a lot of answers, which is wonderful, but also unfortunate. So the Companion is able to find the monster super easy. And for me, I'm kind of picturing it as a really, really obsidian black scaled version of, Godzilla. I think it's the easiest thing to picture. And I don't know, maybe that's what the people at Obsidian were thinking of when they wrote this. But yeah, so he goes to Fantasy Godzilla and is like, well, let's figure out what's going on with where it came from. So he or she, whoever the Companion is, trace back the origin of where this thing popped out of the ground, finds that there's actually a bunch of ancient ruins down in that Site Zero, if you will, for what was happening, and goes through these ancient ruins with an Amaoan scholar, translate inscriptions that portray this Titan walking in the ancient past. So this thing was walking around in a civilization that existed before the Abet civilization did. We don't know what the ancient civilization is. We don't know if it was maybe an offshoot of the Ingwithan civilization or if it was just one that was on its own. And we don't know anything about the Titan that's walking around. Way, 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 way back in the history of Eora, the gods used to walk around in titanic bodies within the globe, but they eventually all agreed to basically shed their titanic bodies and let the normal mortals of the world run the world, and they would just kind of gently guide them. Could this be the body of one of those titans? I highly doubt one of the gods are walking the globe again. It's very more likely that this is just a gigantic creature that exists, kind of like a kraken or a leviathan or something like that. But, that's certainly a possibility. It could be one of the titanic bodies inhabited by one of the gods, or just the titanic body of one of the gods that has been taken over by something else, which is certainly a possibility within this fantasy world. We don't really know the origin. I don't think it is one of the gods, though, because I highly doubt a series of bells ringing would cause this thing to be like, oh, I'm going to come back over here, which is exactly what happens. The Companion rings some bells, the monster comes back, and they deal with it. And that's that. Which it's still very interesting, though, because it opens up the possibility of these giant ancient creatures that can exist, and these civilizations and histories of this world existing from a time before people even were aware of, which just opens up a lot of questions of what has gone on in the history of this world that we're not aware of, and how is it impacting the game world that we're playing it in the present time, for lack of a better word. The last adventure that we have to talk about today is called The Glass Tree, which I've talked about recently, so I'm not going to belabor this one too much, but this is where I'm talking about it officially, so I will still talk about it. The Glass Tree is essentially this location in the Living Lands, which is magical and wonderful and breathtaking and amazing. And there's a glass tree there, hence the name. Your player character sends out one of the companions to go investigate this area for reasons, and we'll find out what happens just from reading it. But I've always liked this one because it talks a little bit of the magic and wonder of the Living Lands, and I'm really excited to play Avowed, and so I'm excited to see things like this in the world. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see this particular thing specifically, and I'll get into why right now. So here's the pitch for the adventure. Legends have spread out about a hidden valley within the Living Lands where fantastic creatures are born straight out of the earth, and new plants sprout out and bloom every day. Some claim the place is sacred to the gods themselves, where they created all kith and wilder out of the primordial elements that churn just under the surface. Many of the tales describe a breathtaking, enormous glass tree with branches that reach across the valley and up to the clouds. They say its base is guarded by a foreboding helmed warrior clad head to toe in glittering armor. This adventure is brought to your attention as a player character. You send out a companion to basically go investigate, hey, go find this lost hidden valley that's legendary in the Living Lands and all this kind of a thing. It's an interesting idea and concept. First off, a hidden valley that is existing somewhere, but no one has ever been able to find it. It kind of gives you those vibes like treasure hunting movies do, or like the Uncharted games where you're like, there's this entire city and people just happen to forget where it was. So this is this huge valley in the Living Lands where this giant glass tree is that just shoots up to the sky. So, I don't know how you didn't see this thing, but whatever. Maybe because it's made of glass. I guess it may be translucent, so it'd be harder to see unless you were close enough. I don't know what the narrative excuse is, but there you go. But the idea that this place is sacred to the gods themselves and that this is where they actually created all the living creatures of the world is an interesting idea. Galawain, one of the gods of the world, is mostly responsible for creating random creatures. So who knows, maybe we could learn some things there if this place does exist in Avowed. It'd be interesting to see for sure, and it'd be an interesting idea as well if this was a physical place in the world of Eora that the gods actually found very, like they all together, they thought this was a special place. That is something I would want to see, because that means there's definitely something going on there. Aside from the fact there's a giant glass tree. What the hell's up with that? The conclusion of the adventure. It took 3 separate expeditions from the south coast of the Living Lands for the companion to reach the fabled Valley of Glass. Though the legends have been exaggerated somewhat, the reality of the valley was breathtaking. It contained flora and fauna that had never been seen in any other known part of the world, and great lumbering beasts and terrifying winged creatures that flew so high they seemed to disappear into the clouds, and at the heart of it all was the great, quote-unquote, glass tree. When the companion examined it, it became obvious that it was not made of glass at all, but a fascinating clear wood bearing transparent sap along its great trunk and branches. Though the storied helmed warrior was nowhere to be found, the companion did find a pair of glittering clear wooden gauntlets at the base of the tree. It's unclear who made them, and if they were made from the tree's wood, and why they had been left there. With the route finally charted, other explorers began arriving in the Valley of Glass, but subsequent visitors reported that the flora and fauna had started to fade and disappear. Some speculate that the arrival of outsiders was causing the magic of the valley to retreat back into the depths of Eora. And so here we have the fabled Valley of Glass, which, if is a place in the Living Lands for us to go see. In Avowed, it will very likely be a lot more mundane, a lot less wondrous and fantastical, which is sad to hear about, but I suppose it plays into the story. And so it turns out that this glass tree is not actually glass, it's just a form of transparent wood, which is still cool and fantastic. As well, it's got transparent sap. So it'd be interesting to see, why is that? What's happening to the wood that makes it see-through? Is that just some weird environmental phenomena? Is that something that can happen to any kind of a wood? What's going on there? I want to know more about the origins and the way that happened, because you don't just get a glass tree showing up out of nowhere, or even a transparent tree showing up out of nowhere. Perhaps if this place was special to the gods, maybe they made it. Maybe they were just goofing around. Who knows? Maybe this was a hallowed place for the gods, and they're like, hey, let's see what we can make in this world. And so they just made random things, and they're like, I bet I can make a tree that is see-through. Sure, here you go. And I don't know, maybe that's all it was. But that's what we have. We didn't see the warrior that was supposed to be guarding this area, but they did see a lot of fantastic beasts and creatures as well as plants. But all these things are kind of disappearing now that people are coming in. And I don't know what the presence of normal people coming into this area would do to make magic go away, unless there was something behind the magic, some sort of intelligence that was drawing it back. Or if perhaps it was a completely separate kind of thing. We talk a lot, especially in this podcast, about everything, all the bodies of people and the trees and all that having essence within inside them, which is the stuff that souls are made of. Perhaps there's something here in this Valley of Glass that is different. It's not essence. It's something like that maybe, but it's not. And so when more of this Eoran essence come in, perhaps more of whatever is contributing to this Valley of Glass starts retreating, because it's not the same thing. I don't know, that's one idea that I'm having. What ideas do you have? worldoфeora@gmail.com. And so while I will be sad to not see the Valley of Glass in its wonderful, beautiful splendor, I'd still be excited to check it out. And who knows, maybe Obsidian will create an adventure where we get to get a glimpse of the past and we can see this thing in its beautiful glory and learn some more stuff. But yeah, that's it for the glass tree. And actually, that's it for all the adventures. There we go. We've gone through all 5 of these legendary adventures. Now, I know this episode went a little longer than my episodes normally do, but I didn't want to split this up into 2 parts, so hopefully y'all are okay with that. But yeah, I really like this stuff. When I first started getting into the lore for this podcast and this world, these adventures were one of the things that I kept coming back to. Also because I was getting into tabletop role-playing games for the first time ever, and these were really good adventure hooks. Like these, especially if you go to some of the more minor ones, like this is legendary status. If you go to some of the minor adventures, you get some really good campaign starters, if you will, and it's interesting to see where you can go from there. So I highly recommend any of you out there, if you're into tabletop role-playing games, check it out. And obviously you can fiddle around with it how you want to do homebrews to change the way the conclusions go or something like that. But yeah, it's all very interesting lore. Like we're talking about a giant titanic beast that can exist in ancient civilizations. We're talking about the idea of teleporting to a different plane of existence, or perhaps the center of the globe that isn't actually the center of a planet like we would normally think of it. We're talking about this wonderful magic that exists but then can kind of disappear, a place that gods might have found special. We're talking about all this different stuff, and it opens up so much doors within the lore of this world to ask, like, how does all this stuff work? Like, what is going on? Where are the marks coming on these people on the inner left thigh that they have? Like, what's going on there? And it raises a lot of questions that I think makes us dive more into the lore of what's going on, more about the soul and of animancy and Audra and the gods and all of this kind of metaphysical stuff, and which is my favorite topics within the lore. So I really value these, and I hope that you guys were able to value this as well. But with that all said, let's wrap up today's episode.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
So what might some of this have to do with Avowed? I mean, I touched on it a little bit when we were first discussing it. So like for a solitary mark, maybe we'll run into characters in the game who have that mark, or maybe we'll hear some more about that. The edge of all known things. Hopefully we can just read Amaya's codex. Hopefully it's done and that there's an actual portion of that book we can read in Avowed and learn a lot more about the lore and the history of the world. Liminal spaces, maybe teleportation will be possible within Avowed, or they'll just be figuring it out. I mean, that's a good fast travel system. I'll give you that, if you can invent something like that for the game. Coal Eater might bring in the idea that we could have a mega boss or something in Avowed that is this gargantuan creature. And who knows if it's connected to the main narrative or not. And the Glass Tree, being an actual location in the Living Lands, might be a place that we can go explore after all this magic has kind of run out. So those are the quick things that I can think of. There's obviously a few more that I think you could extrapolate from, but we don't have a lot of time because this episode's kind of already long as it is. It implies a lot of interesting stuff. So hopefully we see some remnants of this stuff in Avowed. My main hope for any of this is that there's just more lore like this in the game of Avowed. Like, I love Pillars of Eternity and the world that Obsidian has created, and I love that I can read these adventures and just be like, what's going on? And ask questions and really be invested. I want that same thing in Avowed, and I know that they can do that. Like, I know Obsidian can pull that off, but I also know that Avowed is a different game than Pillars of Eternity, right? So the delivery method for lore might be a bit different. And so I'm trying to temper my expectations by saying that Avowed's different, so how they might want to reveal the world might be a little different. Maybe it's not as grandiose, which isn't my way of saying that they're not going to do it or that I don't think they can. I don't know how they're going to present lore in the world, if it's just going to be through books that you can read or conversations you can have, or if you can have things like this going on. So I don't know. I don't really know, but I'm excited to see what they come up with. I really hope for this big, like, massive, mythical, legendary level stuff when it comes to the lore. You know what? If I get a badass game about the Living Lands and the lore is just about the history of that area, I'd be happy with that too. But I'm all about specializing and focusing on one topic at a time as well. So that's kind of my hope and stuff. What games have I been playing lately is usually what I go on from here. Well, I've been playing a tabletop game called Monster of the Week, which is a hacked version of the Apocalypse Now game, or Apocalypse Worlds, I believe. It's powered by the Apocalypse game system, and it has been an absolute blast. Like, I know that I've always enjoyed GMing, but it wasn't until I played in this system that I loved it. Like, I am hooked on this. It's been a fun time. My players are role-playing as themselves in the city that we live in, and we basically said that monsters are coming out of the book that this game, that the rule set is for. Monsters are coming out of this book into reality, and now we have somehow gained superpowers, and we have to deal with these monsters to get rid of them. And they're trying to investigate what's going on and how this happened and what they can do to stop it. And it's been really fun so far. I haven't run a classic vampire yet. I'm kind of looking into that into a future session, but not right away, because they might listen to this, and I don't want them getting a heads up on that. So I've been playing that. As for video games, I've been playing Desperados 3 for a while, but I kind of just fell off of it. After playing 10 levels of the game, it's a fun game, great game, love it to death. The isometric stealth action kind of a game, it's definitely my bread and butter, but after a while, you kind of just like, okay, I need something else. It's like, have you ever eaten a food that is really flavorful and you love it, but then after a while of eating it, you're just like, I need a different flavor in my mouth right now. That's kind of what's going on with games. And I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what to play. I know I want to play something with mouse and keyboard because my hands are hurting currently, and so I just need to give them a break from controller. But I'm not sure what game to play. I tried playing Encased, which is a sci-fi post-apocalyptic RPG, and it was super cool and very, very fun. And I love the world that it's set in. But for whatever reason, I was just finding it either a little too slow or I was really not jiving with the combat. I found it broke it up too much. I want to come back to Encased, and I think I will, but right now it's not what I'm looking for. So I'm kind of in that really stupid space where you're like, I don't know what to play, so I'm playing a game for 10 minutes at a time, and then I don't like it, and I move on to another game. So perhaps I just need to go into reading a book or something. I did, however, load up Weird West today. I started a new game, and really, really was digging that where it was going, and that 10 minutes quickly turned into 45, and so maybe Weird West is the game that I'm going to play now. I don't know. I'm not going to commit to it because I could change my mind in 5 minutes. Who knows? We'll see. I'll play it right after I'm done editing this, and I'll let you know next time. But yeah, that's what I've been up to. But that's it for the episode. Thanks everyone for listening. If you want to send me an email to ask questions or point out anything I got wrong or ask questions about the world, either about the show or about the stuff that we're talking about, obviously, send me an email, worldofaora@gmail.com. And feel free to follow me on Twitter @World of Eora, where I'll be posting mostly just updates on when the show comes out or anything that I think is related to Obsidian or Avowed. Lastly, if you're interested in supporting this show, if you've gotten any value out of it and you just think, yeah, that's something I'd like to do, you can head over to my Ko-fi account, which is ko-fi.com/World of Eora. I'll try to have a link in the description, but for whatever reason, links aren't really working in my show descriptions, and I haven't been able to get an answer as to why. So if it matters enough to you to support the show, then ko-fi.com/World of Eora, you can do it there. But again, don't worry about it if you don't feel like it. That's just there for those who want to do that. But yeah, other than that, that's everything else. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope some of you will send emails about what your ideas on some of these adventures imply about the world of Eora at large and how it might impact Avowed, but again, more just about the lore and the world at large. I'm looking forward to those conversations. I love that kind of a thing. But yeah, that's everything for today. Thanks everybody. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.